In this lesson, we'll learn how to rapidly create a network of small structures. Now, just to show you what has happened since the end of the last lesson is I've taken all of the geometry that we've made and I've applied it to separate layers. So we have columns, facade, and the space frame. All of that has been hidden and put on separate layers because the amount of geometry has started to grow. Now, what I'm going to work on in this lesson are these expo pods. And if you remember from the sketches in the reference file folder, is we have this network of randomly placed pods happening around this base that we have underneath our expo building. So what we're going to do to start this process is first of all create a new source object for ourselves. So I'm going to create a plane and I'm going to snap it onto these four corners and I'm going to isolate this out. Then I'm going to go and add subdivisions to this object, and it's going to be done in a irregular format so that we have a deriving source which is already not very linear. In other words, the edges are not going to be parallel to each other because of how I'm connecting the edges in the process that I'm doing right now. So this is going to be the beginning of your randomization, if you can call it that. So once you're done with the first couple of connections to basically subdivide this object, you can go and further continue using a subdivide modifier. And this is a way that you can add more detail without necessarily doing everything by hand, and you can just go and increase or decrease the amount of subdivisions for yourself. So let's say that I'm happy with this as far as a subdivision. This was the original and this is the subdivided version. The next thing you want to do is create one of the expo pods that is then going to be applied onto this base object. So I'm going to start in plan. I'm going to create a little 5-meter polygon that's going to be the base of my expo pod. So here it is. I'm going to have a radius of, let's say, 3 meters. So it's going to be 6 meters in total. So more or less 5-6 meters is fine. And we can now go and add an editable poly onto this and start to develop it. And I'm not going to go into any detail here because designing this is on a different topic. What I really want to do is just show you how you can go and scatter it around your site in a very quick and easy way. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of detail to this, selecting the top face, and I'm now going to inset this top. I'm going to move it in to create a little bit of a column in the middle. Right click again and extrude upwards, and I'm going to create an extrusion of 3 meters. So this is going to be a very, very small pavilion. It's just going to be a little node, really, where there can be some displayed objects. I'm going to delete this top, or at least grow that selection, and I'm now going to just extrude these outwards by local normals, and that's going to create a little canopy. We can then go and change, going to loop that selection around and then just thin out that edge. So we create a little canopy for ourselves, and perhaps this part in the middle can be moved slightly downwards as well. So I'm not going to do anything more than that. I just wanted to start off by making a crude source object for our pavilions. So your canopy can either be downwards like a little umbrella, or it can be upwards. It doesn't really matter at this point. The main thing is that we just have a beginning to our design, or a placeholder really, for the type of node that we want to create. Now, the long way to do this process would be to go and manually hold down Shift and then just instance this around the entire site. But I'm going to choose another method for the sake of doing it quicker, especially when you have hundreds of these to copy if your project is more complex. Now, I've just gone and made an instance for myself, and the original copy, what I'm going to do with it is go to my compound object and choose scatter. I'm going to then choose the distribution object. I'm going to pick the source object that we had gone and subdivided. And the option that you can choose here in this case is all vertices. That means your Expo Pavilion is going to be instanced to every single vertice that is on your source object, and then just obviously make sure that it is being instanced so that you do have that relation back to your source pavilion. Next, under display, just make sure that you have hide a distribution object selected. Otherwise, you will have two objects interweaving with themselves and causing render issues later on. So now one of the beautiful things about the scatter tool is the fact that you can use your transforms to automatically adjust the scaling or the rotation. So I can create, for example, a 30% size difference between them. So some of them will be smaller, some of them will be larger. Remember as well that you may want to only change that size in the X and the Y. So if you don't want your height to change, because it is a object that should all have the same heights, but will have a different size in plan. For example, some could be contorted in this direction, some could be in that direction. They will all look slightly random, and that can be quite good. So next thing is we want to create some rotation here. So let's create a, let's say, 60-degree difference in rotation. So again, that's going to give even more randomness to these different objects. And it's quite nice how they follow, they kind of stretch out in the direction that they go. So the next thing that we're going to do to this is to go and add an editable poly on top of this so that we can delete the ones that we don't want. So I'm going to go now and just delete all of these on the outside. And we can now continue with what's remaining. So all of these are going to get deleted. Now what you have left is basically all still being instanced back to this original editable poly. Now I do just want to show you that you can still have control over all of them by basically moving your original source object. So this one you can keep out of the render somewhere, but you can still hold on to it because you don't necessarily want to make the changes on the site. You can see that here nothing really happens, but once you edit it on your source object, you can basically create your change globally. And that is really what I wanted to show you in this lesson. It is a much quicker process to use the scatter tool even for architecture, even though it's not necessarily meant for that. But it does help when you want to create something that looks randomly positioned and randomly placed. So I'm just going to take all of these and move them up slightly as well by 0.2 meters so that it looks like they are busy floating above this platform, which we are going to flood with water for the final render. So in the next lesson, what I'm going to be looking at is how to create the interlinking paths between all of these objects. And yes, we're going to be using the same source object, which is this one, to start creating all of that geometry. So hang around for the next lesson as we go and look at that. And we're also going to then create the bridge, which is going to link our Expo platform to the actual riverbank on the side here. So all of that is coming up immediately in the next lesson.